Hello. Oh yeah, I was hoping to get 30 participants, but we've got 31 now. I would like to welcome you all, the panelists and the participants, to this last webinar, and that will be about the regulatory training for universal investigators. I'll first give you some house rules, which means that the presentation will be done first. So we'll finish the presentation, and after the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. But don't forget to put your questions during the talk in the Q&A box you can see probably below in your screen. And I'll keep an eye on that, and then I'll guide the Q&A session. Let me see. You can also raise your hand later, but I'll guide that later. Well, without further ado now, I want to introduce our speaker of today. And her name is Linda Lewis. It's morning for her, and she woke up in a snowy, I don't know exactly where you are, Washington?
Yes.
This morning, but the snow has gone away already. Well, Linda is an MD, and she works with Clinton Health Access Initiative, which is CHAI in short. Maybe you know that abbreviation. She's the Director of Clinical and Regulatory Affairs in the Product Development, Quality, Costing, and Regulatory Affairs team. And also another reason we invited Linda to present on regulatory is that she doesn't have experience only submitting files to the FDA, but she has already also worked at the FDA as a medical team lead in the division of antivirals, so at the US FDA. And she has been involved in the US and international pediatric HIV efforts for a long time. Let's keep it that, Linda. Okay, Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can I just get a show of hands or something that you can all hear me out there?
I can hear you. I assume that the participants will also be able to hear you.
Okay. Well, I am just going to go ahead and start the presentation, and good afternoon to everybody who has joined. This is the final capacity building session for Universal, and this one will be on the regulatory processes that are involved in clinical research. If you dialed in early, you heard me say that most people find regulatory affairs somewhat boring. And in fact, you have probably heard most of the information in this talk in the previous talks. Everything that you've learned about good clinical practice is built around what is required for regulatory review and approval. So much of what you hear today will be a duplicate or a reiteration of what you have heard in previous talks. So let's just dive in here. I'm going to try and cover quite a bit today, beginning with an introduction to regulatory processes, the basis for pediatric approvals using pediatric extrapolation. Then I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about the regulatory agencies, including the FDA and its regulatory structure and mandate, the EMA and its mandate, and some of the spin-offs of those two sort of super agencies, the PEPFAR review of HIV meds and the EMA Meds for All program. I'll also talk a little bit about the WHO pre-qualification program and its structure and mandate, and then go into clinical research and what it does to support regulatory actions. As part of that, I'll talk a little bit about the investigator and study sponsor responsibilities, and then how generic companies use all of this to develop pediatric formulations, including the one that we'll be working on, the darunavir ritonavir, a small size tablet. So the learning objectives are to provide the US and EU regulatory background as it applies to clinical trials, to describe how regulatory authorities expedite pediatric studies and products intended for low and middle income countries, and to identify what is expected of clinical trial investigators and staff. You've seen diagrams that look like this in the past, probably, but this diagram shows you the stages of the drug development process and the regulations that are associated with each of those stages. So there's very little regulatory oversight of the basic research and the drug discovery parts of drug development. Those are the very first steps. However, beginning with the preclinical development, the in vitro studies and the animal studies, these are all regulated by what's called the Good Laboratory Practices documents. And these include the toxicology studies and a lot of the early work before that support going into humans in the first studies. At that stage, whether it's in the US or the EU or some other jurisdiction, there is a process of review of all of that early information before a drug can go into humans in a clinical trial. In the US, this is called an IND. In Europe, it's called a clinical trials application. And that has to be reviewed before the phase 1 study can begin. The phase 1 studies and early phase 2 studies are those studies that identify the pharmacokinetic profile of the drug and really start to develop the safety information around the product. As you move into the later stages of clinical development, the phase 2 and phase 3 studies identify what the best doses are, and then whether that candidate dose and formulation is effective compared to either no treatment or to some other approved treatment. All of this clinical development is supported by different regulatory guidances, good laboratory practices, good manufacturing practices, and good clinical practices, which you've probably heard a little bit about over the last several months. After all of the clinical development is done, the drug sponsor will submit what's called an NDA, a new drug application in the US, or a marketing authorization application in Europe. And that will allow the regulatory authorities to review all of this information again, including all of the clinical trials information. If that data is thought to be adequate, then the product is approved for use in the jurisdiction of the regulatory authority. But that's not the end of the line. The phase 4 studies and pharmacovigilance continues after the product is commercialized and distributed. So the goal of all these regulatory processes is to approve and bring to market high quality medicines. Now I'm going to give a little introduction to basic regulatory processes. Regardless of what jurisdiction you're in, The regulatory authorities have standards for drug approvals. The drug must be shown to be safe and effective. And different regulatory agencies have different interpretations of how much evidence they require to consider the drug appropriate for their population. In the US and Europe, this usually means 2 clinical trials showing efficacy and safety in adult patients. The timelines for different regulatory authorities are different, and they both require that the data from the studies be collected in a format that can be submitted and reviewed and confirmed by the regulatory agency. More and more often, we talk about regulatory reliance. This is the concept that approval of a drug in one country by a regulatory authority can be used to support approval by reciprocity in another jurisdiction. This is a concept that's been initiated and supported by the WHO and is being advanced. You may have heard recently that South Korea, Singapore, and Swissmedic have all been elevated to WHO listed authority status that puts them in line to be relied upon by other agencies. This allows a broader review and reciprocal approval by multiple different regulatory authorities, and will ultimately replace the idea that only the FDA and the EMA and a few other agencies are really considered stringent regulatory authorities. We're not quite there yet, and the FDA and the ICH, or the International Council for Harmonization of Pharmaceutical Work, have not yet fully adopted this concept. What we do know is that all regulatory work requires paperwork, and that's part of what you've been learning about in the earlier series of presentations. You already know most of this, as I said, because regulatory processes really were the basis for all the good clinical practice information. So in pediatrics, we rely frequently on a concept called pediatric extrapolation. This is a concept that was endorsed by many regulatory agencies because it's so difficult to perform complete scientific comparative clinical trials in children. It was proposed initially by the FDA in the early to mid-90s. It was then endorsed by the EMA, and more recently, the ICH has published a pediatric extrapolation draft guidance that has been widely adopted around the world. What pediatric extrapolation means is that efficacy in pediatric patients can be extrapolated from the usually larger and well-controlled clinical trials conducted in adult patients, or from one pediatric age group to another, if the course of the disease and the response to the treatment are expected to be similar. The FDA, EMA, and other regulatory agencies have followed this same general principle now for quite a while, although, again, they have slightly different requirements to support extrapolation, but these may include pharmacokinetic data, exposure response data, and safety data. So what does this really mean in terms of different diseases? Different types of illnesses and different types of medications may allow different levels of extrapolation. With full extrapolation, the regulatory authority agrees that the course of the disease and the response to drug are similar. And this then pediatric approval is based on matching the pediatric drug exposure to the adult drug exposure shown to be safe and effective. When I say drug exposure, what I mean is the concentrations of the drug in the body over the interval of the dosing time period. And we think of HIV and hepatitis C and a number of other infectious diseases as being appropriate for full extrapolation. So we don't do comparative trials to support approval of drugs for HIV and hepatitis C in children. There are other disease processes where we can only partially extrapolate. In this case, the similarity of disease or the response to drug is more uncertain, and there may need to be some PK/PD assessment or a clinical trial to show that the response really is similar in children. One of the examples of this is non-pulmonary tuberculosis in children. There are also other diseases where we really can't extrapolate from adult patients. In these cases, the disease or the response to the drug is sufficiently different in children that assessment in adults cannot predict the response in children. A full clinical program is needed to demonstrate safety and efficacy. And probably the best example of this is respiratory syncytial virus bronchiolitis in infants. There really isn't an adult equivalent of that disease process. And so clinical trials proving safety and efficacy in infants must be done. Angela had provided me with this slide as an example of how we use PK to extrapolate in children. I think this came from the CHAPAS study of dolutegravir at different doses in different weight bands. And this shows the graphic of the drug concentrations over time compared to the adult reference concentrations at once daily dosing or twice daily dosing of dolutegravir. And you can see toward the end of the 24-hour period in this red line graph, the line dips below the reference for adults. And so we would say that that is probably not an adequate match, and in fact was not accepted as a good dosing for children. So the FDA uses this decision tree to decide whether extrapolation is appropriate. And I'm not going to go through this entire flow decision tree, but it will be in the slide packet if you want to go back and take a look at it. The EMA also has a similar kind of flow diagram that companies need to work through to decide if their product is eligible for pediatric extrapolation. It's a little more complicated than the FDA decision tree. But the easiest way to think about this is the way the ICH guidance document has it laid out. And in this, green is good, red is not so good, and there's a spectrum between the two extremes. If the similarity of disease in response to treatment is the same, then you're in the green zone for the pediatric extrapolation. We also always assess, well, how good is the evidence that the disease really is similar? And if there's high quality data and high confidence that the disease process is similar, then again, you're in the green zone. The pediatric extrapolation plan is built on these two assessments. similarity of disease and response, and the amount of data available to support that. And then again, in the green zone, we can rely on exposure matching and potentially even enrollment of children in the same trials as adults. So now I'm going to switch over and talk a little bit about the specific regulatory authorities that are used to support pediatric drug access. The one that I'm most familiar with, because as Angela noted, I worked for the FDA for many years. The FDA's mandate and responsibilities are described in US law and regulations. And that's why they can't be very flexible, because it would require an act of Congress to change FDA's responsibilities. But the FDA starts by reviewing new chemical entities or new drugs with the submission of an investigational new drug application or an IND. The FDA reviews all of the available information from the drug discovery, from the laboratory testing, animal testing, if there was any, to ensure that using the drug in humans is likely to be safe. An IND is required for all human studies to begin in the US, or for studies that are sponsored by US government agencies like the NIH or the CDC. And it contains all of the initial manufacturing processes and specifications, the early development work, all the in vitro and animal studies, as I said, and the protocol. Someone needs to
try to mute somebody.
The protocol for the first-in-human clinical studies, and a general plan for the human studies that would follow that. This also allows legal shipment of an unapproved investigational drug for use in the clinical trials. And all studies that follow the first-in-human study are also conducted and reviewed under the IND. An IND can be waived if the drugs that are being studied are all previously approved and are being used in the same doses and general populations that have been looked at some way in the past. And the research is not intended to support changes in labeling. And so many of the studies that are done by clinical investigators at academic institutions fit under this waiver of IND, because they're evaluating drugs that have already been approved by the pharmaceutical companies. This gives you a little idea of both the cost and the timing of drug development. The green bars are indicative of the innovator drug companies' activities, and the pink are more the generic developers' activities. And if you start with drug discovery and making the product at a scale that you can use for clinical trials, all the way through to filing the IND, beginning the clinical trials, submitting the request for approval, the NDA, and the NDA being approved, it can last anywhere from 8 to 15 or 16 years of drug development time. Relatively speaking, the generics are much faster, but they're set further out because in most cases, the generic company can't begin their drug development process until after the patents have expired on the innovator product. This is becoming increasingly more expensive. Drugs developed in the US now are almost $1.4 billion to bring to market, particularly with some of these newer biologic products. So it is a really time-consuming and very expensive process for innovator pharmaceutical companies to bring a new product to market. It's also not a sure thing. For all of the drugs that enter phase 1 first in human studies, only about 60% of those will be successful in phase 1. There's even more narrowing down in phase 2, and only about 35% of drugs entering phase 2 will move further along. After that time, though, the chances of success improve a little bit, and 60% will move into an NDA submission. And if they get that far, most drugs have a 90% probability of success. But when you put all of these together, from beginning first in human study to an NDA approval, there's only about a 12% probability of successful drug approval. So it is not a process for the faint of heart. So how does the FDA go about approving new meds? As I said, they come with a new drug application, and this contains full reports of all the investigations of safety and effectiveness that support the product, all of the chemistry and manufacturing information, and these are covered under one section of the FDA law, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. An example of this would be the innovator product for darunavir, which is called Prezista, and Norvir, which is the AbbVie original ritonavir. Another pathway is what's called the 505(b)(2) NDA. And this is an application that contains some full reports of investigations, but at least some of the information that would normally be required to approve a new drug is based on studies that were conducted by somebody else or by another drug company. And the applicant essentially refers to that information, and the FDA can look at it to support the product. And this is the pathway that was taken for many of our pediatric HIV generic products, including the dolutegravir 10 milligram scored dispersible tablet, because the original innovator product was a 5 milligram tablet. This will also apply to the darunavir ritonavir product that will be used in Universal, because there's no innovator product that it combines those two drugs. And the last pathway is what's called the abbreviated new drug application, or the ANDA. These are the pathway used for true generic drugs that contain basically information from bioequivalence studies showing that the proposed generic product is identical in its active ingredient, its dosage form and strength and route of administration to the previously approved product. And this is the pathway taken for many of the PEPFAR generic products, particularly the adult products like the 50 milligram dolutegravir adult tablet. So the United States FDA has specific requirements for pediatric studies. By law, all of the drugs that are expected to have any use in children are required to be studied in children via a pediatric study plan. This is submitted by the innovator company when they submit their request for approval for an adult product. And it has to be agreed upon with the FDA with specific studies and specific timelines described. All new applications for HIV meds are required to have this kind of pediatric assessment describing the potential use in all age groups. And this needs to be submitted with the filing. In that way, the company is essentially asking for a deferral to submit their pediatric studies later, and in some cases may ask for a waiver of doing pediatric studies, either in particular age groups or for particular drugs. The FDA has maintained for many years that all HIV medications must be studied in children, at least over the age of 1 month of age. In Europe, there is a central marketing authority that is how drugs are approved in Europe. This usually goes through the EMA, and new drugs are authorized using a centralized marketing authorization application procedure. Manufacturers submit their dossier with the evaluations of quality, safety, efficacy to the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, and that agency is responsible for scientific review through its Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use. The processes are really quite similar to those used by the FDA, but of course the names are all different. If the CHMP gives a positive opinion following an assessment of a new drug, then they propose to grant marketing authorization for that medicine, and that is sent directly to the European Commission. And it's the European Commission which then grants the marketing authority for the European Union as a whole. The Central Marketing Authority is then automatically valid in all of the European member states. They launch drugs in individual European countries according to the corresponding national authorities. The EU also has regulatory requirements for pediatric studies, and similar to the US, pediatric studies are required for all antiretroviral products. Waivers are rarely given for antiretrovirals. In fact, I don't think ever in the EU either. They have a mandatory pediatric development program and studies that have to be agreed upon in a pediatric investigational plan. And these are reviewed by a pediatric committee of the EMA. Again, it's intended to review and agree on specific studies to be done and with specific timelines. Compliance with the agreed upon PIP can lead to a 6-month extension of the drug's patent and marketing protection in the EU. This centralized marketing authorization procedure for pediatric medicines allows a single dossier submission to be reviewed by the CHMP, and the resulting opinion is sent to the European Commission for adoption throughout Europe. So it really does speed up the approval and access to pediatric medicines. Now, because these processes only apply in the US and Europe, there was kind of a roadblock to getting high quality new drugs available in low and middle income countries. And in the early 2000s, President Bush authorized the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR. And this made a new route for products to be procured and distributed by US agencies in low and middle income countries. And to support this, the FDA developed a special review process for HIV treatment and prevention products. The PEPFAR reviews are only available for HIV products, and these are generally generic companies. They have the same filing requirements and the same quality standards as other FDA filings. And they rely heavily on the FDA approved labeling of the innovator product and published information related to that product. This was intended to allow distribution of HIV meds that were still under patent in the US without breaching the US market patent protection. The PEPFAR drug sponsor can engage in communications with the FDA, and particularly for pediatric products, they will frequently have pre-submission meetings to gain agreement on exactly what the product is, what the comparator for the bioequivalence studies will be, and any early chemistry and manufacturing data. This is the process that was used for the dolutegravir containing dispersible tablets through collaborations between the ViiV, the innovator, generic manufacturers, and CHAI, sharing technical information, regulatory expertise, and reference drug samples to ensure a similar manufacturing process. The FDA PEPFAR review program has really been a lifesaver for people with HIV. Some of these drugs went through the 505(b)(2) process. These were reviewed by the Division of Antivirals. These are the products that are slightly different from the innovator product, either by type of tablet, dispersibles versus liquids, or different strengths. And the division has been very collaborative and has committed to doing priority reviews for up to 3 generic companies producing each of the prioritized pediatric products. A submitting company can be a little more flexible in terms of justifying dosing that may be somewhat different from the innovator's approved dosing. And we see this because many of our pediatric generic products are dispersible tablets and use weight band dosing that's not common in the US. The Office of Generic Drugs oversees ANDAs, and these have also really been quite frequently used for HIV generic products. And they base approval on chemistry and manufacturing information and a strictly defined bioequivalence to the reference innovator product. While these numbers are not up to date now, you can see that there have been over 120 tentatively approved ANDAs and not quite as many NDAs, and very few have been withdrawn relative to the number approved. At last count, there had been 243 applications for over 300 products. Sometimes there are multiple different dosing forms in an application. So this has really speeded up access to HIV therapy. The European Union developed a similar type of process. The EU Meds for All, or Article 58 regulatory path, was established by the European Commission to facilitate registration of medicines to prevent or treat diseases of major public health interest in low and middle income countries. The objectives are similar to the US PEPFAR program, but is expanded beyond HIV meds. So this program provides scientific assessment for eligible medical products for use outside of the EU. The EMA and the EU Meds for All team conduct the regulatory review of the dossier, which is identical to a standard EMA regulatory review, but includes input on risk-benefit and appropriateness from regulators in the target countries. This is really an underutilized pathway, and the EMA has been working to make this procedure more widely known and easier to access. Because the innovator and drug development and patent protections made it very difficult to get high quality products into low and middle income countries, the WHO established their pre-qualification team. The pre-qualification team was founded in 2001, specifically to assess the quality of products and inspect manufacturing plants for HIV generic drugs for use in low and middle income countries. And it has been extremely successful in prior to the PEPFAR review program to assuring quality of products that were being distributed internationally. It's important to remember that the WHO pre-qualification is not a regulatory authority. It does not grant marketing authorization in any country, but it is successful in speeding access to quality assured drugs for distribution. WHO pre-qualification has subsequently expanded their assessments, and now outside of HIV, they assess the quality of finished pharmaceutical products in several therapeutic areas, and these are determined by different WHO disease teams. They provide assessments of active pharmaceutical ingredients that can be used in multiple products, and quality control laboratories. And they also provide technical assistance and conduct extensive training activities with national regulatory authorities. The WHO PQ activities have been critical in promoting access to drugs. They conduct extensive manufacturing site inspections for drugs identified as essential by WHO disease teams. There is the advantage that they have very low registration fees, but the review process can be quite slow, and that's the major drawback for the process. However, the PQ team also manages the collaborative registration procedure, which is open to all national regulatory authorities of member states who choose to participate. And it's intended to conserve resources and speed national registration of products that have had a full PQ assessment. In doing this, the WHO PQ team shares their opinions and inspection reports on a secure website, and participating national regulatory authorities interested in a particular drug can access the PQ review materials, and in exchange they agree to give an opinion on national registration within 90 days. This has really speeded up access in a number of countries, and it's been a very successful program. The drug sponsor must ask to be listed in the CRP process, and then must submit the same dossier that they submitted to PQ to the participating national regulatory authorities. Drugs that are approved or tentatively approved by the FDA are cross-listed with WHO PQ, but they're not eligible for CRP because the FDA is not allowed to share their written documents. Unfortunately, it's that legal thing again. So these graphs give you a little sense of the scope of the WHO PQ CRP efforts. This graph was as of August of 2022. There had been 363 registered HIV/AIDS meds through CRP, 166 TB meds, 103 malaria products, and 63 reproductive health products. A handful of other disease processes are included. But as you can see, this has been a huge help to national registrations of HIV, TB, and malaria products. The CRP pre-qualification medicines and vaccine program has 56 participating national regulatory authorities, and this has resulted in 1,400 submissions and 717 registrations over the time period that it's been available. So this has been a really useful program for registering products in a number of countries that might otherwise just be overwhelmed with the number of products to be reviewed. So I'm going to shift gears now and talk more about the requirements for pediatric studies to support regulatory filings. There are some big categories of these requirements. The first is that the clinical trials must have an appropriate study design. And in general, as we've said, studies to support regulatory approval in pediatrics target the PK data to show that the drug exposure is similar to that found to be safe and effective in adults. In pediatric studies, because children can't really consent to participating in studies, they rely on their parents and their doctors to enroll them in appropriate studies. But there are extra safety measures that are put in place for pediatric trials. And in this case, we don't generally do pediatric studies on healthy children without a disease. So study participants must have the potential for direct benefit from the drug. So they must have the disease or the condition for which the drug is being developed, or be at risk for that process. Study of safety and tolerability are key objectives of pediatric trials, and how many children are enrolled and how the safety data is collected is very important to spell out in the pediatric protocol. In general, treatment strategies, comparative efficacy, scientific investigations are less critical to regulatory authorities for initial approval, but are definitely important for identifying to guidelines groups and to clinicians best use of a new drug. New dose recommendations of previously approved drugs to support fixed dose combination or weight band dosing may require supporting PK or modeling data. The other thing that a pediatric study has to do is identify the source of the study drug and keep that secure. A study drug can be an investigational product, a new formulation, or a previously approved product. But again, you can't just switch drugs in the middle of a study without going through some additional description and paperwork. And it's the investigator's duty to be sure that the study drug supply is secure. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly from the regulator's perspective, is that the data collection should be very carefully thought out in a pediatric study. Data should be collected in a standardized way in a format that's acceptable for regulatory review. Data can be entered into either paper or electronic case report forms, but should have identifiable source documents like lab tests, clinic notes, EKG tracings to provide an audit trail. Any change to data entry should be explained, and all communications with participants and study teams and study monitors should be retained in the study records. Case report form access and source documents should be kept very secure, particularly anything that has personally identifiable information for the study participants. Investigator responsibilities for regulatory or registrational trials are fairly specific, and these you've heard about during the other good clinical practice sessions. Each site will have one primary investigator usually, but we'll have a team of other researchers with specific duties. There may be research nurses, pharmacists, data specialists. The primary responsibility of the principal investigator is to ensure that the study is conducted according to the protocol and local regulations, and also to protect the rights and the welfare of the participants, including being able to provide medical care if that's necessary. The investigator ensures that informed consent is obtained from all participants and oversees control of the study drug, including proper storage, distribution to participants, and disposal at the end of the study. The investigator ensures that the IRB or the ethics committee review and approval is done, and that the ethics committee is updated if that's needed during the study. And also, the investigator agrees to follow all of the adverse event reporting requirements that are local or protocol required. So at the end of a trial, there is almost always a regulatory audit, but this really shouldn't be a frightening or scary experience. If you've followed your good clinical practice guidelines, there should be no problems passing an FDA, EMA, or WHO PQ audit. The regulatory authorities do have the authority to review, copy, verify all clinic study records that are going to be submitted to support a regulatory approval. Before the pandemic, the FDA was auditing hundreds of clinical investigators and clinical sites every year. Those numbers are still down, but they are returning to their previous pattern of study in evaluating sites. The FDA says that the biggest problem they identify when they do audits is sites not following the protocol that they're supposed to be following. Some other common issues that have been identified are poor supervision or training of study staff, inadequate principal investigator involvement in the study, inappropriate delegation of duties to unqualified persons, failure to protect study participants, and overworked investigators and staff in cases when there are too many participants enrolled or too many sites, too many studies running at one site, or the study is just too complicated and asking for too much data to be collected. So the last section here, I'm going to talk about how generic drug companies use all of this information to develop products. So we know that access to innovator drugs in low and middle income countries remains limited, and the costs are often way too high and unaffordable. Generic manufacturers do have licensing and regulatory paths to provide less expensive but still high quality products. The generic companies can receive their license to manufacture drugs still under patent either directly from the innovator or from a group called the Medicines Patent Pool. The Medicines Patent Pool was organized several years ago to increase access to and facilitate the development of life-saving medicines for low and middle income countries through voluntary licensing and patent pooling. And so they provide licenses to generic companies with cooperation of the innovator pharmaceutical companies and the agreement that the generic companies won't be marketing the product in the countries where the innovator is marketing. So because darunavir and ritonavir are both off patent, we didn't need licenses for the generic drug development for this product. So what generic companies do is really quite similar to what the innovator companies do, but without the initial years of scientific evaluation. They'll have technical discussions, develop prototypes, do comparative testing, and select their lead candidate product. Then they'll do some initial bioequivalence testing against the innovator reference drug to see if they're on the right path. They may need to do some revising of their formulation as they scale up the manufacturing. They develop their analytical methods to prepare for commercial production. And they generally start with manufacturing what are called exhibit batches. 3 of these are usually required, and the company may choose to produce more if they think there'll be a fairly large market for the product. But then they use these batches to do their final release testing and test the stability of their products. Stability testing is that testing that's done to show that the pills or liquids or the formulation doesn't break down when it's stored on the shelf. And these in-use stabilities testing are a little more complicated when in some of the pediatric products you have a scored tablet. So they'll have to split the tablet and test to prove that you get two relatively equal halves, and that those don't disintegrate inside the bottle after you've split them, things like that. And finally, they'll conduct their larger pivotal bioequivalence study that's used to support their final application. And they do this both in adult patients, usually under different conditions, and analyze their study results. So the generic companies will compile their registrational dossier according to electronic standards, and it contains everything that they've done. So pharmaceutical development, manufacturing description, the bioequivalence testing methods and results, and stability testing results, all the information if they got some of their starting materials from other companies, analytical methods, and then information on their primary drug substance. They submit this dossier to regulatory authority or WHOPQ, typically with at least 6 months of stability data to justify their expiration date. Then they can update that expiry with real-time data during the course of the review, so that they may end up with a 2-year or 3-year expiration date. Pediatric products that are submitted to the FDA can get a priority review, which takes about 6 months. So how does this come back to the darunavir-ritonavir product that you guys are going to be working on? This will be a process that is a combination of efforts between Penta doing the clinical work and a generic company that's making the product. Penta has been conducting modeling work to support dosing for the clinical trial. The generic company is developing their product of darunavir-ritonavir with 120 milligrams of darunavir and 20 milligrams of ritonavir in a small size tablet. They've requested a 6-month priority review and are on target to submit their product for review in the next year. In parallel, the darunavir-ritonavir product will be available for use in the clinical trial. It looks like the product will be available about the time the trial is ready to begin. Dosing recommendations are being confirmed by modeling and simulation, and that may be enough for an initial regulatory approval. But if not, the data from this clinical trial will be used to support dosing, particularly in the smallest weight bands, because that's where the original dosing recommendations have the least amount of data to support them. And in the end, the primary goal that we hope to achieve is that children gain access to an optimal second and third line antiretroviral product, and everything goes smoothly. And I believe that's my last slide. Well, sorry about that. But thanks for listening, and it looks like there may be a few questions. Angela, have you stopped sharing?
Yes, thanks, Linda. That was, you said that it's boring, but I don't. Well, I'll put my camera on as well. I don't think it's boring at all. It's really insightful to know how all the different. Well, I still find it difficult really to see all the different PEPFAR and all the all the different organizations, or how you call it, that are involved.
That's true. There are a lot of different groups that are involved, and each one has a role that there's some overlap, and there are some pieces that don't quite fit together as smoothly as we would like. But overall, it is so much better a process and so much more regulatory flexibility than when I started working at the FDA about 20 years ago. Those were the bad old days.
Yeah, and especially, yeah, I think HIV's also changed the landscape a bit, and the velocity and with the low and middle income countries on the radar, really. Well, let's go to there is two real questions, I think, and they are both from the same person. So I think I'm not sure whether what is the first and the last name, but it's Yamusa Karabenta. And maybe because the first question, I'm not sure whether I understand it. So I will try to ask this person to ask the question live, if that is possible. Maybe Pauline Amuga has to help me here. Can I see it?
So I'm actually looking at the questions.
Okay.
So I'm going to answer the second question first. The generic.
Maybe we can repeat the question, because I don't know whether everybody can see it.
Yes.
So I will ask the question and then you can answer. So Yamusa Karabinta would like to know if a generic drug produced in African developing country can be approved through ANDA.
The answer to that is absolutely yes. And there are a number of generic African generic companies. One that I know specifically is Strides. Has a number of PEPFAR approved products, and others. They have to meet the same quality standards as anyone else, and if and be inspected. So yes, that's entirely possible. And there's a big move now. You may be aware that to improve and expand local manufacturing in Africa and other areas where drugs are often imported from outside. I think the pandemic pointed out how difficult it is for drug distribution if you have a global public health emergency and the supply chains break down. So having local manufacturing is really important. But yes, that's an easy question.
Yeah, but I've got a follow-up one, because when there is still a patent in America, for example, you cannot just use a bioequivalence study to register it in the US, for example, right?
Right. You to either through the EMA or the FDA, you would have that a local manufacturing company would have to abide by the US and European patent protections, but they could do that the same as any other generic company. Okay, I see the question about CDTP2.
Yeah, I think it's EDC. Is it EDCTP? Maybe Yamusa can speak out. I don't think I'll check whether I can unmute somebody. I'm not that technical.
If you could clarify that question, I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean,
in the meantime, Yamusa says yes, EDCTP, I think. And Yamusa, can you clarify on the chat? In the meantime, I will ask a question I had. What do you think, Linda, about PEPFAR? Is it also needed for other disease areas? Because for TB, it could be also a good idea to have such a program or initiative, right?
Well,
and why do you think that it could be arranged through the European initiative, but that is not happening? Or are there some other options to get TB medication off patent in the resource limited settings?
That is that's beyond my level of authority, but personally,
but an opinion will do.
My personal opinion is that a PEPFAR-like process for other neglected diseases like TB, malaria, schistosomiasis, many of those processes would benefit from having a PEPFAR type review process. And the reason why that's not possible is just because of the way the PEPFAR authorization law was written. It was written specifically to expedite HIV medication availability. And it has never been expanded beyond that. In fact, the PEPFAR authorization expired about a month and a half ago, and Congress has not reauthorized it. So we may all be without PEPFAR in the near future if our political system doesn't take some action soon. But again, that is beyond my level of understanding
how things go. It's more a political thing. Yeah.
It is definitely a political issue,
and maybe so I didn't get another answer from Yamusa, but maybe regarding the EDCTP2, so the universal project, I think, how does a developing country such as African countries proceed to benefit from this partnership? So what I think the answer to that is that that within this program we are developing new medicines that are being that will be available for use, right, marketed in the African countries.
And we hope this may be, again, personal opinion, but we hope that some of the educational capacity building will allow investigators in the sites that are participating to go off and do clinical research on their own and conduct clinical trials that they feel are necessary for their own populations and feel confident that they're meeting global standards. And for those of you who are French speaking,
there was a.
Je suis désolé, je ne parle pas le français. The slides will be translated.
Yeah, so we had a conversation about that, and they will be translated. There will not be a French version of this webinar, though, but the slides can be translated. Let me see. I did have a few more questions, Linda. I don't see more questions in the Q&A, so maybe if people still have questions, please ask, because I think we still have a few minutes and you don't have the opportunity to ask these questions to an ex-FDA employee here. So I'm always a little bit confused how the medicines patent pool, how it relates to PEPFAR. Is there a relationship, or is it broader, or how?
It's broader. It's not really directly related. It was created in response to developing a mechanism that would allow licenses for drugs that were still on patent to be distributed to generic companies for selected products. And it is funded at least partially by the US government, which is perhaps why the innovator drug companies cooperate. But it's really kind of a clearinghouse for licenses. An innovator who has a new product, like the pediatric ALD, abacavir, lamivudine, dolutegravir, can say to the Medicine Patents Pool, we're going to provide these licenses to generic companies. The innovator has some control over that. They can say, we'll give you the license for the adult product, but not the pediatric product. Or you can give the license to a certain number of generic companies, but not more. And it can say these can only be distributed in certain countries where the innovator doesn't have a financial interest, for instance. So there are some controls on Medicines Patent Pool, and they have expanded beyond HIV. Like the pre-qualification team, they have taken on other disease areas. So I know they're providing licenses for some of the hepatitis drugs, viral hepatitis drugs.
Okay, thank you. I don't see more questions. I have one more because I was wondering during your talk about the PQ, pre-qualification thing. Is it a sort of, can you compare it to a GMP, a manufacturing sort of certificate, or is it more than that?
It is a unique entity. They provide essentially a report and an opinion that's very similar to an EMA manufacturing audit. The PQ team relies on the WHO disease teams, the hepatitis team, the HIV team, the TB team, to tell them which products are appropriate. And they're usually products that are defined in treatment guidelines that the WHO publishes. And they say, these are the drugs that we think are important. And then the pre-qualification team then doesn't have to go through and read all of the justification and review and make decisions about whether the drug is effective if it's made correctly. They just have to be able to show that, yes, it was made correctly and it is equivalent to the innovator product.
Okay, thanks a lot, Linda, for for the nice talk, and I see a lot of thank yous and in the Q&A bit as well. So I think the participants were happy with it as well. I've got a few things to tell the participants and ask, because there will be I will launch a poll soon, I hope, and if I can find it again. And I have one thing first. I want to thank Pauline Amuge, who was coordinating this entire webinar series for capacity building purposes under this EDCTP grant. So an applause for Pauline. Thank you very much for all your efforts, and also the instructions you gave me. So I'm going to read out the instructions for the participants. So a link to the slides and the webinar recordings will be sent to all the participants hopefully within 2 weeks from today, but that's probably in the middle of Christmas period. So I assume that it will be early next year. And that will also include a short evaluation survey and a quiz to all the participants. And when you have completed the survey, so the overall survey, so I'm going to launch the survey of today in a minute, but you will also get an overall survey. And when you have completed that, you will receive a certificate via email. So there were a few questions about that. And for the people who, and actually the certificate is only for the people who attended more than at least 75% of the sessions. Let me see. And also I think the materials will also be accessible through the universal website. Okay, I will. Pauline shared it in the webinar, but I will share the link to everybody now. Let me see, everyone. Here you go. That's now the link to the universal project is in the chat, and now I'm going to try to launch the survey, but it says apps. I don't know whether it's going to work, Pauline. Because I think there was previously I could see here is the poll. Okay, here we go. I'm going to launch the poll for today, and so I hope everybody can see it now, and please so this is both in English and in French. So I will wait a few minutes for people to answer. Well, I can see it coming in. Linda, it looks quite good. Let's see, we've got 9 people. Let's wait for, I don't know, maybe I can get instructions from Pauline. For how many people to wait? We still have 38 participants here. Let's try to get more than half, so we're almost there. Yes. Okay, let's go. So you still, the participants still can score, and then I hope that this will be saved automatically. And I think, let me see whether I'm forgetting something. Pauline, do you want to say something? We would like to have 100% participants to
Hi, Angela. Hi, everyone.
Yes, there she is.
Yes, just requesting that we have 100% participation. I see we only have 75% participation. It will be very helpful for all the participants to participate. So only about 7 remaining to give us their inputs. But again, well done, Angela and Linda. Seems like the session has been very good. Over to you, Angela. We are still at 75. Some people may have left their gadgets.
People. We have to wake people up. Maybe in your what time is it in Uganda? At 6 o'clock, isn't it?
5:30, 5:27 p.m.
Well, I think 28. Come on, few more people, but maybe that's that includes the panelists, Pauline. Well, anyway.
Panelists are not able to vote, but I think it's been stagnant at 75. I think the other 7 are off their desks, so you can enter the poll and share it.
Okay. Oh, you cannot see. Can you not see it? Okay. So this is the. It can. So can you see the poll or not? Linda, can you see something or not?
Yes.
You can see it, and then, but can the participants see it as well? I don't know how it works. Anyway, okay. So I think the overall the content was good or excellent, or the content. What is this? Design and presentation content was good, and was it useful? Yeah, maybe some people don't really use a lot of regulatory bits, and your presentation skills were very good, and well, the what is the more technical bit is was I think good enough.
No sé qué, cerquita de acá.
Oh. Hey, is that Alexandra? I can hear you. Okay.
Sorry.
Well, yeah, but you can thank Paulina and us as well. Don't mind. But I'm happy, and I'm also a little bit sad that this is the end of the really last session of this this webinar series for the around the Universal Project and beyond, I think. And I would like to thank all the presenters who ever presented and all the participants, and again, especially Paulina, who did most of the work really, and the technical team, I think also in Uganda or wherever they are all over the world, to make this happening. Okay, I think that's all. If I forgot something, Pauline, just jump in.
That is it, Angela. Thanks to the entire team, all our partners, starting with the EDCTP, the funder, and the painter, the coordinator of Universal. And thanks to our Radbound team led by Angela Colbers, who is here with us. Thanks to the CHAI team, CHAI USA, led by Linda and Melinda, I think, who is traveling on holiday. Thanks to the INSAB team. I know Alex is on, Yohan, and the rest of the entire team. Thanks to our team from Summers, Italy, Pablo and Sheila. Thanks to Professor Tera, our Mali USDTB team, Professor Mali, Professor Mariam, and Abba. Well done. The Penta training team and project management team led by Michele and Peter McKinney. And of course, the Bela Uganda team. Thank you. Thank you very much. So for the participants, we'll be sending out a link to the short survey. It will lead you into RedCap. Kindly participate. We would like to improve on this and maybe make it better for you, definitely, and for the others who may be interested after this year. but also would like to make sure that we are able to generate the certificate for those who are able to complete the brief survey. So over to you, Angela. Happy holidays.
Yes, that was for my last
Happy
remark.
holidays to everyone. And thank you
Happy
very much for
holidays
this.
and Merry Christmas, and have a wonderful 2024 where a lot of things in Universal will happen.
Yeah, we hope so.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all.